My parents begged me to hide my uniform at dinner. Then the general walked in. I kept everything. Every text message my mother sent me that week. Every voicemail from my father. His voice tight with that fake calm he uses when he's about to ask for something he knows he doesn't deserve. The seating chart my sister emailed me 3 days before the dinner, with my name moved to the table by the kitchen door. I kept it all because some part of me already knew I'd need it. That night I stood in the hallway of my parents' house in my dress blues, my hand on the doorknob, and my mother grabbed my wrist. "Please," she said. "Just wear something else. Anything else. Just for tonight." I didn't understand why. Not yet. I changed into a plain black dress because I loved her even then, even after everything. I folded my uniform into my bag and told myself it didn't matter. 40 minutes later, a black SUV pulled into the driveway, and a man in a service uniform with 3 stars on his shoulder walked through my parents' front door like he owned the place, because in every way that mattered to my family, he did. My father's face went white. My mother's wine glass slipped out of her hand and shattered on the hardwood. And the general, the man my family had spent 6 years pretending didn't exist, looked directly at me and said, "There you are. I've been trying to find you for years." That's the moment everything cracked open. But before I tell you how it ended, you need to understand how it started, because the truth is, the betrayal didn't begin that night. It began when I was 23 years old, and I made a decision my family never forgave me for. My name is Mara Ellison, and I grew up in a house where appearances were the only currency that mattered. My father sold commercial real estate. My mother ran the social calendar of our entire extended family like a campaign manager running an election. My older sister, Devon, was the candidate. Homecoming queen. Valedictorian. The one whose accomplishments got framed and hung in the hallway like museum pieces. I was the quiet one. The one who read field manuals under the covers with a flashlight instead of fashion magazines. The one who filled notebooks with maps of countries I couldn't point to on a globe yet, who watched documentaries about Normandy and the Pacific Theater until I knew the names of ships better than I knew the names of my own cousins. My father used to laugh about it at dinner parties. "Mara's going through a phase," he'd tell his friends, swirling his scotch. "She'll grow out of it." I didn't grow out of it. If anything, it grew into me. When I turned 18, I told my parents I wanted to enlist. My mother cried, not proud tears, the other kind. My father didn't speak to me for 9 days. Devon, who was 20 at the time and already engaged to a man whose family owned half the office parks in the county, told me I was embarrassing the family. I went anyway. Boot camp broke me down and built me into someone I actually respected. I found something in that uniform I had never found in my parents' house, a sense that what I did mattered, that the people around me saw exactly who I was and valued me for it, not for how I made them look at a dinner party. I called home every few weeks. My mother always asked the same question first. "Have you told anyone where you really work?" Not "Are you safe?" Not "Are you happy?" Where I really work, like my service, was something to be filed under a euphemism, something dressed up and softened so it wouldn't embarrass anyone at the country club. I didn't think much of it at the time. I told myself it was just my mother being my mother. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. The first time I really felt it, I was 25, home on leave for Devon's engagement party. My mother introduced me to her friends as "my daughter, she works for the government." Vague, deliberately unfinished, like a sentence she didn't want to complete. When one of her friends pressed for details, my mother changed the subject so fast I almost got whiplash watching her do it. Devon's fiancé's mother asked me directly what branch I served in. Before I could answer, my mother laughed and said, "Oh, paperwork mostly." Very boring. She squeezed my arm hard enough to leave a mark. I let it go. I always let it go. The party itself, I was seated at the end of the table, past the cousins, past the family friends, right next to the swinging kitchen door where the waitstaff came through every 90 seconds with trays. Devon's seat was beside her fiancé's parents, the guests of honor, front and center. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Seating charts are just seating charts. Then I overheard something I wasn't supposed to hear. I'd gone to refill my water in the kitchen, and through the door I heard my mother's voice lowered talking to my aunt. "We just don't bring it up," she was saying. "His family is very particular about that kind of thing. It's better if people don't ask too many questions about Mara. His family is very particular about that kind of thing." I stood there with the pitcher of water in my hand, and something cold settled in my stomach. I didn't know yet what that kind of thing meant. I didn't know whose family she was talking about or why my service, the thing I was proudest of in my entire life, had become something to manage like a stain to keep out of the photos. I went back to the table and didn't say anything. But 3 weeks later, back at my post, I started keeping a folder. I didn't know yet what I'd need it for. I just knew I needed it. The folder sat empty for almost a year. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, an email changed everything. Came from a name I didn't recognize, a law firm in the city, 3 names long, the kind that print their letterhead on paper heavy enough to use as a coaster. The subject line read, "Estate of Walter Halloway, time sensitive." I almost deleted it as spam. I didn't know anyone named Walter Halloway. I opened it anyway. The email was from an estate attorney named Priya Castellan, and it informed me that I had been named as a contingent beneficiary in the estate of a man named Walter Halloway, and that I needed to call her office at my earliest convenience regarding matters of significant value and sensitivity. I called the number twice before someone picked up. "Ms. Ellison," Priya said once she confirmed who I was. "Thank you for calling back. Can I ask, has anyone in your family ever mentioned the name Walter Halloway to you?" "No," I said. "Never. Should they have?" There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause that tells you the next sentence is going to matter. "Walter Halloway was your biological grandfather," she said. "On your mother's side. He passed away 11 days ago. He left behind a trust and a letter addressed specifically to you." I sat down on the edge of my bunk so hard the frame creaked. "He also," Priya continued, "left specific instructions that this matter not be disclosed to your parents until you had been informed directly and given the opportunity to respond on your own terms. He was very clear about that condition, Ms. Ellison. Very clear." My hands were shaking by the time we hung up. Not from grief, I'd never met the man. From the sheer size of the question now sitting in my chest. Why would my mother hide an entire grandfather from me? And why had he insisted in writing that I learn the truth before she ever got the chance to spin it? I didn't sleep that night. I just stared at the ceiling, running the math on every strange comment, every lowered voice, every "we just don't bring it up" I'd swallowed over the years. 3 days later, the letter arrived. And everything I thought I knew about my family rearranged itself into something I didn't recognize at all. I called my mother the day after I read the letter. I didn't tell her what was in it. I just asked carefully, "Mom, did you ever know someone named Walter Halloway?" The silence on the other end lasted 4 full seconds. I counted them. "Where did you hear that name?" she said. Not a question. An accusation dressed up as one. I told her about the lawyer's call. I kept my voice level, the way I'd been trained to keep it level in rooms far more hostile than my childhood kitchen. What followed was 40 minutes of my mother insisting Walter Halloway was a complicated subject, that he had made choices that hurt the family, that whatever he'd written to me was probably full of bitterness and lies from a man who abandoned us. She never once explained who he actually was. She just kept circling the wound without naming it. Then she said something that told me everything. "Mara, please, don't bring this up with your father. And especially not at the dinner." "What dinner?" A pause. "There's a family dinner being planned. For Devon and Marcus's anniversary. It's important. People will be there." I didn't push. Not yet. I was learning slowly that information was a currency in my family, and I was finally starting to understand how to hold on to mine instead of spending it the moment I got it. Over the following weeks, the pressure built in small, deliberate increments. My father called to check in, which turned into a lecture about how I was stirring up old history that didn't concern me. Devin texted me a single line, "Don't ruin this for me. You always do this." I hadn't done anything. I hadn't told a single person what Walter Holloway's letter actually said. The accusation came before the crime, which told me they were far more afraid of the truth than they were of me. A few days after that, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced, something she hadn't done in years. She brought a casserole dish she didn't need to bring and a speech she'd clearly rehearsed in the car. "I think you're letting one bitter old man's letter poison your view of this entire family," she said, setting the dish down on my counter like a peace offering. Walter made his choices a long time ago. He wasn't the man you think he was. What kind of man was he then? I asked. You still haven't told me. She waved the question away the way she always waved away anything that required an actual answer. It's complicated. It was a different time. Point is, dragging this up now, right before Devin's anniversary, it's selfish, Mara. It's always been about you wanting attention. I almost laughed. Selfish. The word landed strange in a conversation where I'd asked exactly one question and gotten zero honest answers in return. She left an hour later, the casserole dish abandoned on my counter, a parting line trailing behind her like exhaust. Just don't embarrass this family at the dinner. That's all I'm asking. Embarrass the family. I turned that phrase over in my head for days. I hadn't embarrassed anyone. I'd asked a single question about a single name, and somehow that had become the gravest sin I'd committed against this family in 6 years. The following week, my father called, ostensibly to talk about a fishing trip he had no actual interest in taking with me. 12 minutes into the call, he pivoted, the way he always did, smooth as a closing pitch on a property he was desperate to unload. Your mother's worried sick about this Holloway business, he said. I have to be honest, Mara, I'm worried too. You've always had a tendency to take things too far once you get an idea in your head. Remember the enlistment? Remember how that went? It went fine, Dad. It's been 6 years. I have a career. I'm proud of it. That's not what I mean, he said, and I could hear him backpedaling, recalibrating. I just mean you get fixated. And I'd hate to see you blow up an entire family relationship over some old man's grudge from beyond the grave. He didn't ask what was in the letter. He didn't ask if I was okay. He asked whether I was going to behave. Then Devin called. Her text the week before had been 4 words, "Don't ruin this for me," and her phone call wasn't much longer in substance, just considerably louder. She told me Marcus's parents would be at the dinner, that this was the most important night of her year, that whatever issue I had with Mom and Dad needed to wait until after, as if grief and deception came with a convenient expiration date that always happened to land after everyone else's milestones. You always do this, she said, the same line from her text, like she'd memorized it as a chorus. Every time something good happens for me, you find a way to make it about you. I thought about pointing out that I hadn't brought up Walter Holloway once since our initial phone call. I thought about pointing out that I'd learned about an entire grandfather 3 weeks earlier, and had told exactly nobody except a lawyer who was bound by confidentiality. I didn't say any of it. I'd learned by then that explaining yourself to people who've already decided your motives is a losing campaign. The dinner invitation came 2 weeks later, formal, printed, my name on the envelope in my mother's careful calligraphy. At the bottom, in her own handwriting, she'd added a note, "Please wear something appropriate. This is important to your sister." I didn't know yet that appropriate meant anything but the uniform. I didn't know yet why that mattered so much to her, or that the answer had nothing to do with Devin's anniversary and everything to do with a clock that had already started counting down somewhere in a filing cabinet I hadn't seen yet. I was about to find out exactly how far they'd go to keep me quiet. Through that call, I stopped reacting and started documenting. I went back through 6 years of text messages and started screenshotting every comment my mother had made about my service. The vague introductions, the subject changes, the "we just don't bring it up." Alone, each one looked like nothing. Together, they looked like a pattern, and patterns are the only thing that hold up when people start calling you a liar. I requested a copy of Walter Halloway's full letter and the trust documents from Priya's office in writing, so there'd be a paper trail showing exactly when I received them and what they said. I asked Priya a question that had been sitting in my chest since our first phone call. Why would he write a letter like this? Why would he care this much about timing? She was quiet for a moment. Because he tried to find you once before, Ms. Ellison. Years ago. He told me your mother intercepted the contact and told him you didn't want anything to do with him. He didn't believe her. He spent the rest of his life trying to verify that for himself. That single sentence rearranged 6 years of my life in front of me. I didn't call my mother again. I didn't confront my father. I let them believe the silence meant I'd backed down, the way I always had before. Instead, I called my judge advocate contact, an old friend from my second deployment who'd gone into estate and trust law after she got out, and asked her to review the documents Priya sent me quietly off the books as a favor. I also did one more thing, almost as an afterthought, a small habit from years of writing official reports. I started keeping a timeline. Dates. Names. Exact wording. Kind of file that doesn't argue because it doesn't need to. I told no one what I was building. Not even Priya knew the full shape of it. I just knew that when the dinner came, I wasn't walking in unarmed again. What I didn't know, what none of us knew yet, was that someone else had been building the exact same kind of file. And he was coming to that dinner too. The dinner was held at my parents' house, the dining room set with the china that only came out for engagements, anniversaries, and apparently ambushes. I arrived in the black dress my mother had begged me to wear. She exhaled visibly when she saw me at the door, like I'd diffused something. "You look lovely," she said, and I understood the compliment was really relief wearing a nicer outfit. The house smelled like rosemary and the specific brand of candle my mother only lit for company that mattered. Devon's in-laws were already seated when I arrived, and I watched my mother work the room with the practiced ease of a woman who had spent decades perfecting the art of seeming effortless while controlling every variable around her. She introduced me to Marcus's mother as my younger daughter Mara. No mention of where I worked, what I did, who I was. Just a name and a birth order, like that was the only fact about me worth sharing. I sat through the appetizers making small talk about nothing. I complimented a centerpiece. I asked Marcus's father about his golf game. I performed the version of myself my family had spent years training me to perform at events like this, pleasant, quiet, unremarkable, easy to seat by the kitchen door. Devon's anniversary toast came early, full of warm laughter and inside jokes I wasn't part of. My father raised his glass to family, and the people who know how to act like one. He looked at me when he said it. I understood exactly who that line was for. I held my glass and smiled and said nothing, because I had spent 6 years learning that nothing I said in that house ever changed anything, and because some part of me, some old tired part, still wanted to get through one dinner without becoming the problem. Then came the part one hadn't prepared for. Midway through the meal, my mother stood and tapped her glass with a fork. "While we're all together," she said, smiling too brightly, "your father and I have decided to finalize the lake house transfer to Devon and Marcus. We think it's time the next chapter of this family takes shape properly." The lake house, the one my grandmother, Walter Halloway's late wife, had originally left jointly to my mother and, through her, eventually meant to pass to both of her children. I hadn't asked for it. I hadn't even thought about it in years. But the casual public erasure of my name from the next chapter of this family, announced over dessert plates while I sat there in a dress I didn't choose, landed exactly the way it was meant to. Devon's in-laws clapped politely. Devon beamed. Nobody at that table looked at me, which somehow felt worse than if they had. "There's also," my father added, not looking at me, sliding a slim folder across the table to me like it was a menu, a small adjustment to the family trust paperwork we'd like everyone to sign before dessert. Just a formality. A formality. Sitting at a dinner table with the only copy in the room being theirs, a fountain pen already uncapped and waiting beside my plate, asking me to sign away whatever claim I had left without reading it first, surrounded by relatives clapping for Devon and a clock I couldn't see ticking somewhere behind my mother's bright, brittle smile. I felt the old instinct rise in me, the urge to smile, sign, swallow it, keep the peace the way I'd been trained to since childhood. My hand actually moved toward the pen. Then I thought about Walter Halloway's letter. About a man who tried for years to find a granddaughter he was told didn't want him. About my mother's voice through a kitchen door, we just don't bring it up. About a casserole dish and a fishing trip invitation and a sister's forward text, all of it suddenly visible as pieces of the same machine, built to keep me compliant exactly long enough to get my signature on a page I hadn't read. I didn't sign anything. I'd like to read it first, I said quietly. Table went still. My mother's smile didn't move, but something behind her eyes did. Mara, she said, don't make this difficult. I'm not making anything difficult. I'm asking to read a document with my name on it. It's just a formality, my father repeated, like saying it twice would make it true. That's when the doorbell rang. Early. Unscheduled. And my mother's face changed in a way I had never seen before. Not embarrassment, not irritation. Fear. My father went to answer the door, already talking under his breath about who on earth would show up unannounced. He came back pale, and behind him stood a man in a formal service uniform, 3 stars gleaming on each shoulder, a leather portfolio under one arm. Good evening, the man said, his voice calm in the particular way that only comes from decades of commanding rooms much larger than this one. I apologize for the lack of notice. My name is General Theodore Halloway. I believe some of you may recognize the surname. My mother's wine glass hit the floor. I sat frozen, running the math. Halloway. The same name on the estate letter. The same name my mother had spent 6 years refusing to say out loud. Walter was my father, the general said, looking directly at me now, ignoring everyone else at the table entirely. Which makes you my niece, Mara. I've been trying to reach you for 3 years. Every letter I sent to this address came back marked refused. Every email bounced from an address I now understand your mother created and monitored without your knowledge. He set the portfolio down on the table, beside the trust paperwork no one had let me read. I also understand, he continued, that there's a meeting happening tonight about a family trust. I have copies of the original documents my father filed before his death, documents that name specific protections for any beneficiary who serves or has served in the United States military. Documents your parents were notified about in writing 4 years ago. My father's mouth opened. Nothing came out. I'd like everyone to sit down, the general said, not unkindly, but in a tone that made it clear it wasn't a request. 'Cause what's in this folder is going to take a few minutes to go through properly. And I think it's time my niece finally got to see all of it. For 6 years, my family had controlled every piece of information I had about myself. In that moment, sitting at that table, I finally understood. They hadn't just been hiding a grandfather. They'd been hiding the one person who could undo everything they'd built on my silence. Nobody moved for a long moment. Then, one by one, the family settled back into their chairs, the way people do when they sense the floor has shifted beneath them and standing up feels suddenly dangerous. My mother tried one last redirect. Theodore, this really isn't the time, or... It's exactly the time, the general said. Your daughter has spent 6 years believing her own family was ashamed of her service. I have a folder that explains exactly why, and I think she's earned the right to see it before dessert is served, not after everyone's gone home and the story gets rewritten again. Devon shifted in her seat, glancing between our parents and the uniformed stranger now occupying the head of the table like he'd been invited all along. Marcus, her husband, looked like a man calculating exactly how fast he could leave without looking like he was fleeing. My father cleared his throat. Theodore, whatever you think you know. I don't think, the general said. I know. I have the correspondence. I have the certified mail receipts. I have the trust amendment Walter filed the year he learned you'd been intercepting his attempts to contact Mara. I have considerably more than I need. He opened the portfolio. I felt my pulse in my ears. 6 years of half-explanations, vague introductions, lowered voices through kitchen doors. All of it was about to be laid out on a dinner table in front of the entire family that had spent those 6 years pretending none of it existed. "Mara," the general said, sliding the first folder toward me, "I think you should be the one who reads these out loud." Every eye at that table turned to me. For the first time in my entire life, I wasn't the one being managed, minimized, or seated by the kitchen door. I picked up the first page. Item 1, the returned letter. I read it aloud. A letter from Walter Halloway dated 5 years earlier, addressed to me at my parents' house, the only address he had on file. Stamped across the front in red ink, refused, returned to sender. "I never refused this," I said. "I never saw it." My mother's jaw tightened. "It was a difficult time," she said. "We thought it was for the best." "You thought wrong," the general said quietly. Next page, Mara. Item 2, the email trail. A printed string of emails between Walter Halloway and an address I didn't recognize, m.ellison.family@, an address built to look almost exactly like mine, off by a single letter. The emails, written in my mother's unmistakable phrasing, politely informed Walter that Mara has made it clear she doesn't wish to reconnect with that side of the family, and asked him to respect her wishes and stop reaching out. I had never sent a single one of those words. My mother's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. "I was protecting you," she said, her voice cracking for the first time. "His side of the family had problems, Mara. Money problems. Reputation problems. I didn't want any of that touching you." "You didn't ask me," I said. "You decided for me. For 6 years." Item 3, the trust amendment. The general slid a third document across the table, the actual trust amendment Walter Halloway had filed 4 years earlier, the moment he discovered the deception. Named me directly. It included a specific protective clause. Any beneficiary who entered military service would receive an accelerated and protected share of the estate, shielded from any attempt by other family members to dilute, delay, or redirect distribution. He'd written the protection into law before he'd ever even met me, 'cause he already understood what kind of family he was protecting me from. "He knew," I said quietly. "He suspected," the general corrected. "By the time he died, he knew." Item 4, the dinner itself. The general pulled out one final page, a printed copy of the trust paperwork my parents had asked me to sign that very night, the small formality before dessert. He'd had his attorney review it that afternoon, the moment he learned the dinner was happening. "This document," he said, "would have stripped your protected share down to nothing, redistributed primarily to Devon, and required your signature before midnight tonight to be valid under the original trust's amendment window, which closes," he checked his watch, "in 50 minutes. The room went utterly silent. "You weren't asking me to sign a formality," I said, looking at my parents. "You were racing a deadline. Tonight. With me. At this table." My mother didn't answer. My father stared at his plate like it might offer him an exit. Item 5, the calendar. The general slid one last sheet across the table, a printed calendar page, my mother's handwriting visible in the margins. It tracked the trust's filing windows for the past 4 years, with a single date circled in red, the date of tonight's dinner. "Your mother," he said, "knew exactly when this window opened and exactly when it closed. This dinner wasn't planned around your sister's anniversary. Your sister's anniversary happened to fall close enough to the deadline to make a convenient cover story." Devon's head turned sharply toward our mother. "My anniversary was a cover story?" My mother said nothing. For the first time all night, she had run out of redirections. I sat there looking at 5 pieces of paper that had taken 6 years to assemble into a single undeniable shape. A returned letter, a forged correspondence, a protective trust amendment my own grandfather had written into law before he'd ever met me, a deadline disguised as a dinner, and a calendar proving none of it was an accident. There it was, 6 years of vague introductions, intercepted letters, fake emails, a lake house quietly reassigned, and a clock ticking toward midnight, all of it converging in a single undeniable file laid out across my parents' good china. For a long moment, nobody at that table said a word. Devon was the first to break. "Mom, is any of this true?" Her voice had lost its usual polish. She looked genuinely rattled, like the family mythology she'd built her entire identity on had just developed a crack she couldn't paper over. My mother opened her mouth and nothing came out except a small, broken sound. My father tried to recover his footing the way he always did, with volume. "Theodore, you don't understand the full context here. There were reasons." "There's documentation," the general said evenly, "and there are excuses. I've spent 30 years learning to tell the difference between the two, and so evidently has my niece." My father's voice faltered. He looked at me, maybe for the first real time in years. "Mara, we were trying to protect this family's reputation. Your service, people ask questions, they make assumptions." "You mean you were embarrassed?" I said. "You've always been embarrassed. You just finally ran out of ways to hide it." Marcus quietly pushed his chair back from the table, clearly wishing he'd skipped dinner entirely. Devon stared at our parents with an expression I'd never seen on her before, not anger at me for once but something closer to disbelief. "You told me," Devon said slowly, "that Mara didn't want anything to do with her side of the family. That's what you told me about him." She gestured at the general. "You told me that for years." My mother's hands were shaking now. "It wasn't a lie, exactly." It was exactly a lie," I said. "It was several of them, stacked on top of each other for 6 years." The general closed the portfolio with a quiet final click. "I'd like the original signed trust documents back," he said to my father. "Tonight." Along with a written acknowledgement that the amendment proposed this evening is withdrawn. My attorney will follow up in the morning regarding the documents that were sent to my father bearing a fraudulent address. My father didn't argue. He didn't have anything left to argue with. I sat there, surrounded by the wreckage of every excuse my family had ever given me, and felt something unclench in my chest that had been tight since I was 18 years old standing in a recruiter's office. I didn't yell. I didn't flip the table or storm out, though some small, tired part of me wanted to. Instead, I stood up, smoothed my dress, and looked at my mother. "I'm not going to pretend tonight didn't happen," I said. "But I'm also not going to spend the rest of my life punishing you for it at every holiday from now on. I just need you to understand something. I'm not ashamed of my uniform. I never was. You were ashamed of it, and you spent 6 years making that my problem instead of yours." My mother's eyes were wet. "I don't know how to fix this," she said. "You don't fix 6 years in one dinner," I said. "But you can start by telling the truth from here on out. That's all I'm asking." I turned to my father. "And no more formalities. I'm not allowed to read first." He nodded, jaw tight, saying nothing, which for him was as close to an admission as I was going to get that night. The general walked me to my car afterward. "Your grandfather would have liked you," he said. "He had the same habit. Never raised his voice. Just made sure he had the paperwork." "I learned that from somewhere," I said. "Apparently not from this family," he said, and for the first time that night I actually laughed. I drove home in my black dress with my uniform still folded in my bag, and for the first time in years I didn't feel like I was hiding anything. I just hadn't put it back on yet. 3 months later, the Lake House transfer was formally reversed. My share of Walter Halloway's trust was distributed exactly as he'd written it, protected, untouched, mine. My mother and I talk now carefully, the way two people do after a long renovation neither of them is fully sure will hold. She's stopped introducing me with vague half-sentences. Last month, at a cousin's graduation party, I overheard her tell someone plainly without flinching, "My daughter serves overseas." No euphemism. No lowered voice. It wasn't an apology. But it was something. Devon and I are still rebuilding slowly. She sent me a long email a few weeks after the dinner, apologizing for years of comments she now understood were built on a story that was never true. I don't know yet what our relationship looks like on the other side of that. I'm willing to find out. My father and I are still mostly silent with each other. Some renovations take longer than others. The general, my uncle, I've started calling him that now, and it still feels strange and good in my mouth, calls me every few weeks. He sent me a photo of Walter Halloway in his own uniform, decades younger, the same steady eyes I apparently inherited without ever meeting him. I keep that photo in my wallet now, next to my ID. I never have to hide my uniform at a family dinner again. Nobody's asked me to since. Few were in my position, 6 years of vague excuses, a hidden inheritance, a family asking you to sign something you weren't allowed to read. What would you have done at that table? Have you ever discovered your own family was managing a version of your life behind your back the way mine was? How did you find out, and what did you do once you knew? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one.